Welcome into episode 349 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Brew and Scott McLaughlin. Today, the Boston Bruins management and ownership brass met with the media following what was 17 players cut from Boston Bruins training camp, sent down to Providence's training camp. Names that were included among those 17 players were Georgi Merkulov and most notably Fabian Lysell, who on this podcast we mentioned had a slow first week of camp, but really came on in the last week plus. And we'll discuss that storyline, which was probably going to be the key story for me going into this episode. That was until the Days of Our Lives. Jeremy Swayman drama saga continued. And
is Days of Our Lives on at 11? Is that similar time, right? Soap operas are like midday.
Yeah, midday soap. Yeah, this midday soap.
We have interrupted Days of Our Lives.
This midday soap opera was brought to you by Cam Neely, Don Sweeney, Jeremy Swayman, and his agent. But look, Bridget and Scott, let's just jump right into all this because I don't want to steal some of the quotes because there were some good ones. So you guys were at the press conference. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, so let's, I guess, briefly recap like the big quotes here, the big takeaways, in case anyone did miss it. You know, people have real jobs, might not have been following along. So Sweeney off the top, actually, even before that, Charlie Jacobs gives the first opening statement and says, just to get out in front of it, I've been in constant communication with Neely and Sweeney on the Swayman negotiations. Basically, you know, I leave the numbers to them. Okay. Sweeney also briefly touches on in his opening statement in the first question, says, no real update. You know, we're still in communication. We're still talking. Still a gap there that we have to bridge. Playing the politician. Okay. You know, a couple more questions about it. Neely has not yet been asked, and maybe I should have just addressed this question right to Neely.
We need to start doing that. He's the one who actually tells you stuff.
He is, but I asked Sweeney, were you surprised by Swayman's ask at any point in this process? And he starts to give his politician answer, and Neely jumps in unprompted and says, I was surprised, and laughs, but clearly has now like opened up the door to like, hey, I have some stuff to say, guys.
And then you did.
Yeah, and Kevin Paul Dupont follows up. He had the next question and asking, okay, like, what are you surprised by? Or, you know, and so Neely said, you know, goes into it. Dupes then asks him, you know, can you share any specifics about his ask or your offer? And the money quote of the day was Neely says, I'm not going to get into the weeds on what his ask is, but I would have 64 million reasons to play. So very clear that their offer to Jeremy Swayman right now is 8 years, $8 million a year. And this, you know, I think Sweeney obviously is perfectly happy to keep playing diplomacy and not say too much. Cam Neely is just as he was as a player. He is the blunt object, the brute force. He is just going to say what's on his mind. And I think he saw this as his opportunity to air his grievances, air his frustrations with this. And to try to, you know, Cam Neely's job above everything else is protect the image of the Spoke B. Like, ultimately, that is really the team president's job. Is you are essentially the one in charge of your team's image and reputation. And I think this is his way of trying to fight back in the PR battle and put some real pressure on Swayman and his agent.
Well, I think he helped win that PR battle today. I would say that coming out of it, one of my takeaways, besides the fact that Swayman is not going to be back for opening night, which is the main one, is that even with that fact aired out there by both Montgomery and Sweeney, the management was able to kind of turn the the finger right back at Swayman and allow everybody to think, okay, well, is he asking for too much? Because $8 million, like that contract sounds, comparable to some other goalies that are like him. And so the conversations that I've had with people, even in the very short time since we got back from the Garden, has been, I think Swayman might be greedy, which some people were saying right along. Some of the people I talked to, they were not saying that before. So clearly something that Neely said, which he said with quite a bit of emotion, resonated with fans, and they're not 100%. It's not a one-sided blame game, really. And Neely kind of took the blame and put it back on Swayman a little bit, especially because if you think about in Neely's career, like I don't think he ever was really pushing for this massive contract. It almost makes you want to know what it was. Both Sweeney and Neely's comments kind of made Swayman's agent look like the bad guy, which people can probably jump onto that narrative.
Yeah. Well, let's just jump back a press conference too to really give the whole picture of why, to Scott's point, Cam Neely feels the need to protect the image of the Spoked Bee. So you have the last press conference where Don Sweeney addressed a report, a rumor from Ryan Whitney over at Spit and Chicklets that the Bruins offered him 4 years at like 6.2 or something like that. And that Swayman wanted, 8 years, like a McAvoy type deal, 8 years at 9. Rich Keefe at WEEI went on record like probably 3 weeks ago at this point where Swayman's asking for 10, Bruins won't go more than 8. So from the Bruins perspective, there was this narrative out there that they slapped Swayman across the face with a lowball offer of 4 years and 6 and change.
Yeah, so I for a second I was thinking maybe the person who heard, which I believe it was Whitney that put this out there, that it was 6.4 million a year. I was like, maybe you just misheard 64 million.
It's possible. It's possible. So obviously, but so the Bruins' reputation is like, oh, they're going low. Which Cam Neely, by the way, in the press conference today said he's a former player. He's not a fan of go low, go high, meet in the middle. He likes to deal with comps. And so, that's how Don Sweeney operates. So the Bruins were feeling as though they were being misrepresented by some reports out there that they were lowballing Swayman. And they wanted to correct the narrative today and say, in not so many words, that we have offered Swayman 8x8. Now, look, it's been such a he said, she said type of negotiation that, like, you don't even know what to believe even when people say it. But let's just assume that what Cam Neely inferred today is accurate, that the Bruins have offered Swayman 8x8 and that was the offer kind of all along. Then, yeah, absolutely, the Bruins are kind of vindicated, and more of the fingers should be turned towards Swayman and his agent right now.
Well, I will say we don't know if that was the offer all along. Like, Neely didn't specify when they made that offer.
No, but he never brought an unreasonable offer to the table.
But
sure, but I mean, what each side
deems reasonable or unreasonable. That's why I term it he said, she said, because to me, this whole situation's been kind of dirty. Like, both sides are trying to make themselves look the best they can and maybe not tell the whole story.
Yeah, what I would say is that if Neely's getting up there today and giving that number, I would assume that means that offer's been on the table for at least a little bit, right? Like, they didn't make that offer yesterday, and now he's going up there blurting it out while Swayman's like still thinking it over. Like, I would assume that offer has had to have been out there for a little bit and either declined or not responded to or not countered or whatever the case might be. Swayman just didn't budge, maybe. You would have to assume that 8x8 has been on the table for a little bit now. So, yeah, just seeing reactions on social media, it's a little split, but it has definitely generated more pro Bruins, anti Swayman sentiment than I think we've seen at probably any other point during this. Now, I've also seen pushback the other way of like, anytime you're negotiating in public, it's a bad move. And that Neely throwing this out there is a bad move. And I understand that side, like that opinion, but I don't agree. In this case, I think what Neely did is the right move. Like I think the team does in some way needed to get it out there that like they're putting a real offer on the table, because the perception has been that they're not going on the years, or they're low on the money or whatever. And I even said that on the last podcast, guys. Like I said, if I were the Bruins, because another part of this, so Ryan Whitney on Spittin' Chicklets, when he then responded to Sweeney calling him out, he stood by what he's previously said, the low ball 4 by 6.2 or whatever it was. He said he stood by that. And he added that he thought 8 years, 8 or 8.2 per year, something around there, would get it done. And that's coming from someone who is admittedly pro player, anti-Sweeney. And I said it and I wrote it. I said, if the Bruins haven't put 8 by 8 on the table, they should do it immediately and leak out to someone that they've done it. Well, Neely just said, screw leaking it. I'm just going to straight up tell you we've done that.
Yeah, it was very strategic.
Yeah, he was like, here, just do the math on this real quick, guys. 64 mil.
Well, if you think about it though, right? So like from this day forward, okay, so Monday, September 30th until October 7th, or October 8th when they start the season. We don't know what's preceded today, but to your point, Scott, like we all know now, at the very least, there's a $64 million offer on the table, and now the whole world knows it, right? So Swayman's agent and his camp, they can no longer play you guys don't know what we're being like. No, everybody knows now that they've at least been offered $64 million, and that is completely fair for Jeremy Swayman. Like there's no lowballing there. And so now everybody knows if he doesn't sign, it's because he's asking for more than that. And that's why you're seeing the Bruins fans narrative change on Twitter and online and everywhere else, because now they're saying, okay, well, if he doesn't want to sign for 8 million or 64 million overall, like he's trying to reset this goalie market. Now him and his camp, they're just being stubborn. And I think what you saw today was Cam Neely being very strategic, saying, world, we've offered him 64 million. Now the pressure, I do believe, falls to Swayman's camp, because now they know if a deal gets done, it's because they're asking for more and they're going to come across pretty poorly. So I do think that this was an effort by Cam Neely today to just get this done as soon as possible, because if you're Jeremy Swayman right now and you're his agent, all eyes are on them, because everybody knows what they've been offered and that it's totally fair, a fair deal for the player. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on Swayman's camp now to get this done.
Yeah, the comments did a few things, because the comments about wanting to set the goalie market makes it seem like it insinuates that side of it is the side that's being unfair, the side that's not willing to come to the table. Like the goal from the agent side is to try to get all of the goalies' prices risen and set the market for them for the future. And when I think people just want to hear that both sides are, the main goal is to get a contract done. And another part of it that has to bother Swayman is they're coming out in public and saying he's not starting opening night right now. So like knowing, and based on the comments, them saying he'll probably need over a week to try to get back before, after a deal is done, he'll still need another week on top of it, is what they're saying. Like they're pushing it back longer, and hearing you're going to miss the start of the season, I don't know if that affects the player. And just his want to be back, I have to assume, is pretty strong. So there could be a little bit of motivation there and a little bit of a push in that way. But I do think that Cam Neely, I wasn't sure if he did that on purpose, Scott. Like, I know you guys like, oh, it was smartly done, but I feel like he may have just like spit it out because this is what I do. Like sometimes I'm not planning on saying something and then I'm like mad about it, so then I just say it. So I almost wonder if it was premeditated because to me it didn't feel it.
I think it was. I think he knew he was going to talk about Jeremy Swayman and this whole situation today. So I would guess that he had at least planned out like just how much he wanted to say about it.
Like the number, do you think he was planning on saying the number?
I think that line was rehearsed. He knew he was going to say that. That was too quick and clever to have not thought of that beforehand.
Like that's like one of those things you say it to your friends and you're like, oh, I wish I could say this publicly. And then he just came out and was like, yeah, I'm saying it. I love it. I'm saying it.
Yeah, I think he at least, if I had to guess, I would bet ahead of time he at least decided that if I'm asked about it, I'm not going to dodge it. And if no one asks me, then maybe I won't say it. But yeah, it was, and I've already heard people there, and I've heard other people like make this comparison. It's like that was like a Harry Sinden line. Like that's the kind of stuff Harry Sinden used to say about players, where he would just be brutally honest and blunt. And Bridget, it's when you were saying earlier, like you don't know if Neely was ever looking for a big like obviously not this big because the money's gone so far up. Like I'm sure Neely wanted money back in the day. And it's like Sinden's the one that he would have been negotiating with. So obviously he's in a different role now. Like he is the management. And so I also saw people saying that, like shame on Neely, a former player now being a management stooge. And it's like, it's literally his job. Like he's the team president. Who do you think he works for? He doesn't work for the players. Like, like that's the role.
Guys, I think what Cam Neely did today might be the difference between Swayman signing before the regular season versus him signing closer to the December 1st deadline. Like because these negotiations are usually hush hush, it enables the negotiating to continue longer because people are in the dark. Once the public is in the know of an offer, like it really does. That this wasn't a rumor. This wasn't Rich Keefe. This wasn't Courtney Cox. This wasn't Ryan Whitney. This was Cam Neely, president of the Boston Bruins, saying we've offered him $64 million. Now that everybody knows that, it puts a lot of eyes less on the negotiation as a whole and more on Swayman's camp in general. And I think that makes a big difference here. And also,
and by the way, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Charlie Jacobs also talked about how the Bruins are always going to spend to the cap and that they might use a little bit of wiggle room, that management asked for a little bit of wiggle room throughout the year for injuries or whatnot. And that he referenced NHL league minimum salaries and how the Bruins have like $8.6 million or around $9 million left in cap space or something like that. And that the delta between leaving a little bit of room versus what Swayman is asking for could be the difference. And it's like, so Swayman just, it sounds to me, Swayman is literally asking for every single cent remaining of cap space for the team. And it's just, and the Bruins are sitting there like, no, like here are your comps and here's a fair deal. And I just think that, I just think a lot of people are looking at Swayman's camp right now.
Yeah, what I was going to say was what you just brought up, Brian, which was the cap space comment. And to look at the cap space right now, so it depends whether or not they have the extra forward listed on there. With an extra forward that's at league minimum, that only leaves right about like a little bit less than $9.5 million left for Swayman, which and obviously you're not going to want to spend right to that line because that would just be dumb. Like nobody spends right to the line because you got to call another guy up that has a slightly different contract, or you're stuck in a situation where it doesn't work. You got to release someone or what have you. So that would mean the contract has to be lower than $9 million really for them to have the wiggle room.
Yeah. And like the whole like resetting the market thing, which again, like Neely was asked directly, do you think he's trying to set the market? And he said, yes, I do. You just can't do that as a restricted free agent who's 2 years out from unrestricted free agency. Like it's just like almost impossible to do. The only goalie who's gotten more than $8 million a year as a restricted free agent was Andrei Vasilevsky, who got the 9.5 that he is currently on. He won the Vezina right before he signed that. Like he was the Vezina, he was the best goalie in the world, Vezina Trophy winner. Jeremy Swayman finished 7th in Vezina voting. Like, it's just not the same situation. Vasilevsky had played 60 plus games that year. Like, Swayman hasn't done that yet. So, like, even if you're talking, like, even if you're saying, okay, he's not gonna be able to set the unrestricted market like Igor Shesterkin is going to do. Igor Shesterkin is going to reset, above the 10.5 that Carey Price got. He's probably going to get 11, 12, maybe even more. But as a restricted free agent, like, even if you're trying to reset that, like, I know that with Vasilevsky, that was 5 years ago, but it's really hard to, like, justify Swayman getting what Vasilevsky got. Like, they're just not at the same point in their careers. Swayman just hasn't done what Vasilevsky had done to that point. So, in its own way, $8 million for a restricted free agent who's done what Swayman has done actually, like, would in some ways reset the market. Like, again, I've made the Igor Shesterkin comparison. That was only 4 or 5 years ago, and Shesterkin got under 6 per year. So, like, with a relatively similar resume to where Swayman is right now. So, like, you're already bumping up $2+ million from that. So, like, you are changing the market, but it seems like Swayman wants to do so much more than that, where he wants to match the 9.5 that Vasilevsky got, or, like, get paid what an unrestricted free agent might get. And, like, I don't think it's going to happen, and I think at some point he's going to have to accept that.
I don't know why the agent in this case thinks this is the right person to do it with, for the reasons that you just mentioned. It's like, what makes Swayman the guy that you're going to say, okay, me and my client, Jeremy Swayman, are going to be the ones to do this? It's not set up for the perfect situation to push the market, like you mentioned, Scott. So here we are talking about his side and being unreasonable because of what was said by management today.
Well, I think Gross is looking at a rising star in the National Hockey League, playing for a team who traded away the other half of their goalie tandem and, looked at the Bruins in a vulnerable position to maybe get away with this. And it's like, look, there's a fine line between an agent doing his job and a player wanting what's best for them. No one's going to sit here and judge a player for wanting to get paid. This is Swayman's livelihood, and Louis Gross, as his representative, is doing his job to an extent. But at the end of the day, he's a restricted free agent. He has never played an entire NHL season as a true number one goalie workload, and yeah, they're certainly they're just playing with fire, because I look at Swayman this offseason. I think is a, regardless if he gets paid, it's kind of a loss for him in a way, because if this goes into the regular season, the public perception of him amongst Bruins fans is gonna go down, just because I feel like he ended last season as a massive fan favorite in Boston. People love him. We loved how he played in the playoffs, and we loved his character and his performance since wearing the Spoke Bee. And here we are now, and you're talking about a fan base that's calling him selfish to an extent in the wake of today's press conferences, and that's just not something that should have happened. Like, I feel like this entire summer has been handled poorly by all involved, between Swayman's comments on the Shut Up Mark podcast, between the Bruins management's last 2 press conferences going off on Hinge on Spit and Chicklets in the first one, and then Neely kind of doing some public bidding today. It's just gotten really ugly and really public, and it never needed to get to this point. And I feel like Louis Gross, as Swayman's agent, he is not going to have a fun future dealing with NHL GMs going forward because of the William Nylander saga, this Jeremy Swayman saga. I just feel like GMs around the league are going to hate working with this guy to the point where it's probably going to be a tough league for him to do his job well in.
Yeah, I'm interested to see like what happens with some of his clients going forward. I mean, obviously, most famously, he's William Nylander's agent, and in 2019, when Nylander was, or the 18-19 season, when Nylander was a restricted free agent, they dragged it all the way to December 1st and finally took, I think it was 8 years, or was it 6 years? I forget the exact deal, but like just under $7 million a year. On December 1st, like hours before that deadline where Nylander either had to sign or wasn't going to be eligible to play that year. Obviously Louis Gross has continued to do business since then and continued to negotiate and has landed some of his clients, really good deals. And that's why his clients like him. Like, if you're picking Louis Gross as your agent, you are expecting or are planning to play hardball and to try to get top dollar. Like, ultimately, it's the player's call, right? If Swayman called up Louis Gross today and said, you know what, like, I just want to get in, I just want to play, let's take the 8x8. Louis Gross might think that's the wrong thing to do. He might say, I really think we should hold out longer, push for more. But ultimately, like, he works for the player. So they go hand in hand. And as long as players like Louis Gross and like the way he negotiates, GMs aren't going to have an option. Like, what are you just going to stay away from all his clients? He has some of the best players in the game. Like, you can't do that. So you have to deal with it to an extent. The one other thing I would add here, and Jim Montgomery said it, and I don't know if he was intentionally trying to put pressure on Swayman or just stating a fact, but in addition to, basically naming Korpisalo the game one starter, when he was asked about the ramp up period, he also said, like, the longer you go without taking part in NHL practices and games, the longer it takes to ramp up. And I will use William Nylander as an example here, because what was the worst season of William Nylander's career? It was the one where he held out until December 1st. He never got going that season. He was like a half a point per game player, like way below his career averages. So if you want like some proof of that, like the last time a player did actually push it 2 months into the season, he never got up to speed. Like, he just had an off year. So I guess if you have the big contract in hand, maybe you don't care about that. But if you care about helping the Bruins win a Stanley Cup this year, like Swayman says he does, you don't want this to be the worst season of your career.
Also, if it does take $9 million to get it done, say somehow they come to this agreement, 8.5, $9 million. Think about what you have left to work with. Like, you then are in a tough situation in order to add depth on your roster, because first of all, that probably means Tyler Johnson's not making the team. Like, you don't have enough space to do much with at the bottom of your roster in terms of an extra skaters. There's really nothing left to be had there. So it does put the team in a worse place too, which is another reason why fans start to turn, because they think, okay, well, maybe be a little bit of a team player and give a little bit of money to be used to help depth this season. Because if you do get more than that 8.5 million, the team's in trouble in terms of cap flexibility and in terms of filling out that last spot, I guess you could say, on the roster.
Do you two feel better or worse after today's press conference that this deal gets done sooner than later? I think I feel like a little bit better. I think it might get done sooner than I thought.
Well, it certainly didn't sound like there was no one saying it was close, right? Like, they said there's continued conversation, but Sweeney said that since the previous press conference, which was right at the beginning of training camp about 2 weeks ago, not quite 2 weeks ago, that he didn't have any update besides that. So they've been stuck in that same area since at least then. So it wasn't like they gave an update on some progress. But I think what you're saying, Brian, is that you think this pushes the sides back to the table.
Yeah, I think the game just changed a little bit after today's press conference.
I'll be honest, I kind of wonder if it goes the other way, where like this pisses Swayman off so much that, you know, he either doesn't want to talk for a few days or causes him to dig in even more. Again, it's starting at the point where like I think Neely or someone almost had to do what he did today because they've been getting raked over the coals and in the public eye. And at some point, if you've made what you think is a fair offer and know is a fair offer, at some point, like, you have to push back. You can't just keep allowing it to pile up on you. But I think we know, you know, Swayman's side is pretty dug in. I think we know Swayman takes this stuff personally. How many times did he bring up the arbitration hearing? Unprompted, by the way. Like, you know, Swayman is not afraid to talk, but I get the sense that he does not like when someone else talks from the other side. And like, my reaction to that would be like, well, tough shit. Like, it's a two-way game. But I do think like he's going to be pretty pissed off about today. Like, I don't think it's going to be like, all right, Cam, like, I see you playing hardball. You know what? You called my bluff. Like, let's sit down. Like, I think he's going to be pretty ticked off and like almost more determined to dig in.
It could go. It could go that way, depending on people's personalities. You never know necessarily, but yeah, it could. I don't know how much it damages relationships, like maybe, but to me, it just more feels like, all right, we haven't got anything done, and it's a sign that there really hasn't been much progress recently. I think that this is kind of something that's said in desperation, really, and something that's said because it couldn't be held in any longer. And, you know, maybe it's a lesson to other people that sometimes when you keep playing games as long as Swayman has and as long as both sides have, then things can PR can have to step in and decisions have to be made to try to save someone else's, you know, behind from not looking bad. So we're just at the point where it's gotten messy. It's gotten ugly. It was more than I was expecting to hear today about Swayman. I'm not going to lie. I thought we were going to get a similar line to what Sweeney said the first day of training camp, which was like, I'm going to say this opening statement. That's it. But that's not what happened. And I'm glad. I think that it helps a lot to kind of have the other side of the story that had been kept quiet.
Well, and the first press conference was just Don and Monty, right?
Yes, no Neely.
So,
which Neely was kind of the one who
he was probably chomping at the bit.
And you know what it came across to me as well was him wanting to defend Don when Don couldn't really defend himself because people wouldn't have received it the same way as Cam coming in and saying he's not been unfair and, you know, we're in communication. It felt like they had his back and wanted everybody to know they had his back and that he wasn't operating like a jerk and he was doing what he thought was right and what they kind of all agree was fair.
So to my question to you guys, like, I guess I'll just put it this way. It doesn't matter to me how pissed off Jeremy Swayman gets after today's comments because, number one, if they're offering him $64 million, now we don't know how long that offer's been on the table. Scott, you mentioned that earlier, but we do know it's on the table from this day forward. That is more than a fair enough offer. But in my opinion, the simple question that I ask is, who has more to lose if something doesn't happen by December 1st? If Jeremy Swayman does not sign with the Boston Bruins by December 1st, he doesn't play hockey this season. If Jeremy Swayman doesn't sign by December 1st for the Bruins, they just don't get to play hockey with their preferred number one goalie. The player has more to lose this year.
Well, how are Jonas Korpisalo and Brandon Busty playing the first 2 months?
I don't know, but you know
Because
what?
if they stink, then the Bruins have a ton to lose.
Yeah, sure, Scott. But you know what? Like, you also still have X amount of cap space to go out there and address other needs for your team that you aren't spending on Swayman now. Like, I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm just saying
if they stink, then you have to turn around and go trade for another goalie. I mean, your cup window is right now. Like, you can't just punt on a season because Jeremy Swayman didn't want to sign. Brian, you're muted.
Yeah, like I hear what you're saying. But like, simply put, who has more to lose? If you're Jeremy Swayman, you're risking not playing hockey this year, and then you have to go through this again next year.
Yeah,
what if Korpisalo plays really well?
Well, like, yeah, then it swings. Yeah, then it's definitely Swayman, no question about it. Because yeah, it would be unprecedented. Like, for a player of his caliber in his prime to sit out a full season would actually be unprecedented. Like, I can't think of a single example of someone who's done that.
And I feel like
maybe you guys can. I can't. And like, that's like, now you're not just talking about throwing out a season. And by the way, Jeremy Swayman today has $8 million on the table that he can make this year and 7 more years after that. If he sits out, he makes $0 this year. So now that's $64 million guaranteed in your life that is on the table right now.
Yep.
If you sit out, okay, there goes $8 million. That's gone. Now you have to. How are you now recouping 64 million? Like, I don't think that deal's going to be there next year. Not sitting out a full year. Like, who's going to come in with that kind of offer for a guy who just sat a whole year?
His public image takes a massive hit too, in the league and in the eyes of the fans, because everybody knows, to what you just said, he has the opportunity to make $64 million. So if he holds out after December 1st, he's taking a massive PR hit. He's losing the actual cash that you're talking about, and he's not gaining he's losing his leverage as a player on the ice, like everything. I like, obviously the Bruins don't want to play the year without Jeremy Swayman. I understand that completely, but in a situation like this, it gets very petty, and so it comes down to who has more to lose. And like, I think the player has more to lose. Clearly, he can lose $64 million right there. That's generational wealth for himself and his family going forward, because he wants to play hardball, and after already having a more than fair enough deal on the table, and he's trying to reset the market. It's just, it doesn't have to go. He doesn't have to be playing it this way. He just doesn't.
Yeah, and he also likes being liked. Everyone likes being liked. So there's that to lose too. Don Sweeney already knows that fans, for the most part, dislike most of the stuff he does. Like, being a GM, you're going to get crap for all sorts of different stuff, and it's expected. But for Swayman, being a fan favorite is something that he really enjoys, and he likes going out in public and talking to people, and sure would not want that hanging over his head. And I feel like if he sits out a whole season, and then you get, like, you're a player, you get to the end of your career and you look back and you go, do I have any regrets? That's going to be a huge regret. Like, I missed this year in my prime. I could have been playing with my best friends that, we could have won a cup together, and maybe that was the year, but we'll never know, because the whole team was out of whack because I didn't sign and I missed out on this. I just feel like you would have to look at it and think about what you'll feel about it in the future. Will you regret it? And I think the answer is yes. So.
If he doesn't sign with the Bruins by December 1st, I think you've seen him in his last game as a Bruin. Like, his rights will get traded before he ever signs in Boston again. So there's that. And then once his rights get traded, what's he signing for with the team he hasn't played for before after not playing for a year? Like, it just doesn't. I don't know. I don't want to.
It has a chance to snowball badly.
Yeah, I don't want to overreact until this bleeds into the regular season, because it's still camp and there's still a week to get this done before October 8th. But if this drags out into this December 1st deadline, shame on the situation. It's because at this point, it seems like the Bruins have kind of done just about. I mean, they only have so much money to offer the kid. They have a hard cap, and they've already said they've been willing to spend what 95% of the remaining cap that they have for him. It's like, come on, you gotta compromise a little bit.
I mean, if they went to the $9.5 million that we've heard, Keefe says 10, Friedman and Spit and Chicklets both said it was 9.5. Like, if you go to that number, then the Bruins have to trade someone away. Like, they can't fit that under the cap. So, someone who's making somewhere between like 1.5 to 2.5 million is getting traded. Like, if that's what happens. So I don't know who that would be. I don't know. Like, Morgan Geekie is in that price range. Like, could it be someone like that? Like, it would be a good player. So it would hurt the team. Yeah, I don't know, but it's gonna be fascinating to see where it goes from here. Like, I wonder if we hear from Swayman. We know he's not. There aren't any press conferences or media scrums because he's not on the team. So there's none of that through the Bruins. Does he go on some other podcast? Does he find a way to get
here?
Yeah, of course. If Jeremy Swayman, if you're listening, you're welcome to come on anytime. But does he find a way to respond, or is this kind of radio silence for a while now? Like, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on a limb here and say that something gets done in the next week. I just don't. The longer this lingers, especially after today's theatrics, but also tactics. Like, there is legit public pressure and knowledge now on the situation as it pertains to Jeremy Swayman's camp. So he can be pissed off. He can dig his feet in the sand even deeper. But at the end of the day, it's the Jacobs that are signing his check. Like, you can't burn bridges, especially when those bridges are your direct bosses at this point, and until further notice, at least for a couple of years. So,
by the way, it also, like, if he gets traded or whatever, ends up somewhere else, like, grass isn't always greener. Maybe he gets closer to the money that he wants, but are you on a winning team? Like, he doesn't have any trade protection, so he wouldn't have any say over where it is. So, I don't know. Like, he's someone who last year I remember him talking about like the Bruins culture and how he was, he was learning from like guys who had been around the league that it's not like that everywhere. And it's like, well, like that might come at some level of personal sacrifice, right? Like, at some point he might have to make the decision here very soon as to what's more important, being a Boston Bruin or getting top dollar and resetting the market. Like, it kind of feels like that's now very clearly the decision that he's kind of faced with.
So what you're saying is, maybe try to send him over to Anaheim for John Gibson and Trevor Zegras.
Yeah, I think that's a very different life out there than here, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. But we'll see how it plays out, guys. It's fascinating. Yeah, I'm surprised it's gotten this public, this theatric. But in any event, do you guys want to switch gears to some surprising cuts? Because this would have been the majority of today's episode had it not been for some of the pipe bombs today.
Yeah, let's get to it for sure.
So, Bridget, I'll let you start this off because you asked Don Sweeney and Jim Montgomery today at the media availability. I know regarding Fabian Lysell getting cut, not just getting cut from the Boston Bruins, but when he got cut. And I think the sentiment amongst us and many Bruins fans out there is we don't have much of a gripe with the fact that he didn't make the team, but did they give the player enough of a chance in camp based on how he played? And so, Bridget, you asked them that exact question today.
Yeah, I said, what made yesterday the right time to make the cuts? And they gave both Sweeney and Montgomery gave the answer that basically for this last little over a week before the regular season, they want to have pretty much the full group together that they're going to run with, and they want practices to speed up and everything to speed up. So basically meaning like it's very clunky when you have two groups going every day. So like there's reasons to trim down, but I really was more talking about like why Fabian Lysell, like why was yesterday his time to be cut instead of going to the end of camp. And one thing that Sweeney says was, well, just because we cut him yesterday, which was we're speaking on Monday right now, just because we cut him yesterday doesn't mean he couldn't come back in a few days and couldn't come and play in the next preseason game or finish out the preseason at some point with Boston. But so there's that. Maybe they're leaving the door open that maybe he comes back for preseason, though. I'm skeptical of that being the truth, because he also finished out by Don Sweeney also finished out by saying, well, we like his individual game, but it's his team game we want him to work on. So is it that you want him to go work on it? Or is it that you're ready to call him right back up? So there was, to me, there was parts of it that were conflicting.
Yeah, it's like getting down to one group is totally legit and understandable. And this is right around when they do that just about every year. But this kind of added wrinkle of like, well, we might bring them back for Thursday or Saturday's game. That's new. Like I've been covering training camp now for many years, and I will give one example, but in general, players who get cut don't come back to play in preseason games. Like, cuts are cuts. Those are guys who didn't make the team and are now going to Providence. The only example I can think of, and it got like no fanfare and they didn't really announce it, is last year, Justin Brazeau got announced as one of the cuts, but then was still at practice the next day and still played in the next preseason game. And clearly, probably the very next day, had gotten recalled and like they just didn't announce it. And at that time, we didn't really think much of Justin Brazeau, so no one really bothered to ask about it or whatever. But that's the only one I can think of a time where like a player got cut and then still popped up at training camp or in a preseason game. So with Lysell in particular, though, it's like, yeah, the cutting 19 guys, like, that's whatever. It's really that one player. Like, even cutting Georgi Merkulov this early, I'm surprised, but like, I don't think that'd be the end of the world, because I think Georgi Merkulov had a pretty steep uphill fight to make this team. Fabian Lysell, I thought, was right there. Like, I get that he had a slow start and his first preseason game was not good enough. He had a good past week. I thought he played really well in Tuesday's preseason game. Thought he played pretty well in Saturday's. Maybe slight step back, didn't make quite as much of an impact, but still made a lot of good plays and helped drive play and create offense. And I thought he had a couple good practices in between too, including one on a line with Marchand and Coyle. And instead, he gets cut he played 3 preseason games, was not on a line with a single top 9 forward in any of them. And again, like, let's see, maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe he is going to play Thursday night or Saturday. Like, maybe he's back for a couple practices. But until I see that, I kind of have a hard time believing it, just because I haven't seen that before. Like,
yeah,
I haven't seen players yo-yo in the middle of camp.
And why send him down for 3 days? That's what I don't understand.
Oh, to learn the systems, don't you know?
It's like, how is he supposed to learn how to play the Jim Montgomery
systems?
Yeah, how is he supposed to learn that if he's not in Boston? How is he supposed to compete for a spot if he's not in Boston? And by the way, I want to read the names that are still there. So like, if people are thinking, oh, well, most of the guys from Providence are back down. No, there's still some hanging around, and some of them definitely deservedly so. But I think you could make the argument that he should be up there over some of these guys. And so the guys that are still around that maybe are questionable, we think Koepke has had a good camp, so he deserves to be there, but he's somebody that's there over Fabian Lysell, Riley Tufte, Brown, Max Jones, who is still hurt, I believe, Vinny Lettieri, and Billy Sweezy. So these are guys that are still
Jeffrey VL up front too.
Yep.
Is
he also injured?
No, he was back. He practiced on Sunday. I missed Monday's practice because I was writing up everything Neely said. So I don't know if he was out there Monday, but the only thing I would say there, and this is why, is those guys all have to go through waivers. So it's just a different situation. They can't just be sent straight down. And usually with waiver players, you wait till later in camp, because if you put someone on waivers now, maybe a team is more likely to claim them because they could actually then bring them in and have them in like a week of their camp and get them into some preseason games. Whereas if you get closer to that deadline, very few guys get claimed off waivers like this coming weekend, because everyone's trimming down and no one really wants to bring someone new in at that point. So only one of the cuts that the Bruins made was someone who needed waivers, and that was Mark McLaughlin, and he cleared. So like I also found that a little bit interesting that they actually did expose someone to waivers this early in camp, but that was the only one.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, guys, I just didn't believe the player deserved to be cut from camp this early. I think that we talked about it. I talked about it. I didn't like his first 2 practices to start training camp, and I certainly didn't like his first preseason game. Had the rest of camp gone that way, yesterday's cut would have made total sense. But he had a 180 the following week plus of camp. Scott mentioned he had some good practices, and I thought the last 2 preseason games he played, of the 3 he played, I thought in both situations he was one of the better forwards on the ice for certainly the Bruins, but probably for both teams that were out there. And I just didn't think that he merited being cut from camp halfway through. I just don't see how that benefits the player or the organization. I think the organization owes it to themselves to see this first round draft pick of 3 years ago, what he can do with a full camp. And I just think that his play earned him to stick around. There's a big difference between playing well enough to make the Boston Bruins out of camp and staying in camp until the end. I just don't see why the Bruins robbed themselves of an additional week seeing him out there with the NHL boys, the NHL roster, with NHL line mates. And like when that intensity picks up that Monty talks about, good. Let's see how he does in that environment. Just seems like it was just short-sighted. And I can't help but wonder if there's just a real unlikability factor to him off the ice that the coaches just aren't fans of. I wonder if Brad Marchand raving about how much he loves playing with Morgan Geekie played into this, where Monty's like, well, you know what? I'm going to defer to what Marshy wants, and Marshy wants Geekie, and he doesn't want Lysell right now. So if he doesn't want Lysell on the second line, I don't see room for him on the fourth, and the third line, we're pretty much all set. So maybe it was a numbers game quickly.
So I thought about that and saw like a couple other people mention that, to which I would say, with all the respect that Brad Marchand is due, and it's a lot, you can't let players pick the team. So I really hope like that's not why. Like ultimately, if you think your best lineup has Fabian Lysell with Marchand and Coyle, you sit Marchand down and say, we're going to try to make this work. We're going to give it a go. You can be hard on the kid. Absolutely. Ride him. But like, we're going to try this. We're going to give it a good long look. So I hope it's not that they basically let Brad Marchand pick his line mates.
And I wouldn't think Marchand would even say want to disqualify someone from earning a spot. Like Brad Marchand has mentioned multiple times how hard you have to work to steal a spot. But if in management's eyes, he's doing that, I don't think Marchand would have an issue with it, because he said it before. He wants to see these guys come up and take spots. And I think he knows his place isn't to be the judge of whether or not that's the case. That's management and coaching's job to do that. So I wouldn't think Marchand has really much at all to do with this.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be that calculated. It could just be from conversations with players, like who do you like playing with, and it's just like honest answer. I like geeks. I like playing with Chuck. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, I don't want to play with Fabian. It's just like, you know what I mean? It could just be natural conversations that just kind of subconsciously dictate what a coach might decide. Because guys, honestly, all of the people who cover the team, 90% of the fan base, and the 10% that I'm not including probably just don't like the player at all. But everybody who covers the team, most of the fan base looked at Lysell and said, yeah, like he deserves to at least finish camp. Yet the Bruins are clearly in the minority, and they're the ones closest to the situation. So the simple question is, why? Is it a character thing?
I had something pop in my head actually while we were talking, and it has to do with what Scott just said about waivers and it being like an uncommon situation that we can't remember another time. But what if they're trying to decide whether or not one of the guys that's still left in camp they're willing to open up to waivers right now, and then if they make a cut there, then that opens up space for Lysell to come back. Like maybe they're deciding on a guy like Tyler Johnson, or they're deciding on like who, obviously that wouldn't need waivers, but I'm just saying like he's on a PTO. Like maybe they open space up back for him by getting rid of Johnson, or by sending back down Kepke or Tufty or someone that they're making the determination on. Okay, maybe this guy will clear waivers. We're just gonna switch him out. I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with that.
I mean, we'll see. Again, like if Lysell is back up, Wednesday or Thursday, then maybe there's something to that. But personally, I just think to me, it would just be very bizarre if you are seriously considering a player for your opening night roster, you don't move him anywhere, period. Like, you keep him practicing with your team. So they can say whatever they want, but until they actually see it in action, like cutting him and sending him to Providence's camp tells me that he was not in serious consideration to make the opening night roster. Like, until I'm proven wrong, that's what that means to me.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody took it as well. But like, did you guys think that he was still making a case for himself that he could fill the needs that they have? Because let's not forget, one of the main storylines coming into the offseason was how are they going to replace Jake DeBrusk? And like, there's guys trying out for that spot. And I don't think
Cam Neely even said today, we need to find more offense. He said it again today. You just sent down your, along with Patrick, your most talented offensive prospect.
Bridget, I was absolutely floored when I saw this yesterday. Now, Scott, I think was it Scott? Somebody was reporting practice attendance and lines, and I noticed that Lysell wasn't even on the ice. I was going down the lines. I'm like, okay, he's on that line. I'm like, okay. And then I noticed, I was like, all right, maybe they got back late from Philly and they gave some of the guys that played the night before the day off. But then I'm seeing other guys that did play against Philly on the ice, and I'm like, okay. Are they making cuts today? And so I tweeted out like with the asterisk being like, if they do indeed cut Lysell, and I went on to give my thoughts on it. And then 20 minutes later, the release comes out. I couldn't believe it, because to your question, again, he had a slow first week, but the last week plus, I absolutely think he was showing a ton of good things to keep battling for that spot. Key distinction, keep battling. Right? I didn't say he earned it or won it, but I wanted to see what he can keep doing. And I certainly wanted to see him, after earning it in 2 previous games, I certainly wanted to see him alongside Coyle and Marchand, or at least Coyle, in a preseason game. And the fact that, and it would be ideal to get another practice or 2 with him before that game. So the fact that he's not on the ice right now tells me that when Don Sweeney is saying, oh, well, we're always evaluating, and they can come up Thursday, Saturday. Like, I feel like he's doing some PR control, because he knows everybody's like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, why is he cut halfway through camp? I just think you want to cut him, fine, but give it another week. Give him the full camp.
And it is bizarre to me that he didn't get time next to Charlie Coyle in the preseason, besides just in practice, right, Scott? Like, we were there the first 2 days of them being on the ice, and he was with Charlie Coyle right along, and they were in constant communication, and then all of a sudden that never happens, right? Like at some point, did something happen where they decided, oh no, we don't want to do this? Because it seemed like when things started out, that's what they were setting up for. And that's what this was going to culminate in for him, was going to be an actual tryout with Charlie Coyle, who he'd be on a line with if he was going to fill Jake DeBrusk's spot. So we never saw the actual tryout in the whole, like in that hole in the roster.
Yeah, it's a little weird to me that Charlie Coyle just hasn't played a preseason game, period. I think other than guys dealing with injuries, I think he's the only regular who hasn't played to this point. And I definitely remember in past preseasons, like he was the guy who would play like one of the first two. Like so maybe, I don't know, just like it's not a big deal. Obviously, we don't know of any injury thing, but it is sort of weird that like he's like the last one, again, besides like Marchand and Elias Lindholm, who've been dealing with injuries and recovering, who hasn't gotten in yet. But
yeah, he's practiced every day though. He looks fine.
Yeah. So when it comes to like the Lysell decision, and one thing I kind of kept thinking of was, it almost feels like now looking at it, like in their mind there was only room for one of Patra, Lysell, or Merkulov. Like the young, offensive-minded, but smaller guys. Like it almost feels like there was only room for one of those. But the one pushback to that would be like Tyler Johnson's still around. I know he's not younger, but he is a smaller guy too. So like if it's all about, in your mind, hey, we're getting bigger and therefore there's only room for so many smaller players, well then like why would there be room for Patra and Johnson but not Patra and Lysell? Like that, I mean, look, personally, like I'm very skeptical that Tyler Johnson's really going to be able to bring a whole lot, to be completely honest. And he's still in a PTO, so he doesn't have a contract yet, so he might not make the team.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like he's been fine, but like that's it. Like just fine. And he's coming off a year where he had like by far his worst 5-on-5 production.
And I was at practice today. I did not think he had a good practice. He had a bunch of turnovers.
Lysell's had a far better camp than Johnson, in my opinion. Like,
yeah,
and as it pertains to Patra and Merkulov, look, I know it's subjective. I personally was never in the camp of Patra starting in Providence. I know he had to come back from injury and get some reps and see how he was doing. And until you see him on the ice post-injury, you never really know. But in my mind, he was a returning Bruin. Like I didn't see him going to Providence. I know others thought he might start there. Personally, I didn't. So I never viewed him in the same light as Merkulov and Lysell. But Merkulov, to me, I understood him being cut because, I just don't see his skill set or his size or the combination of the two really translating to the NHL level. He didn't really pop much in game action during preseason. He looks really small out there. But Lysell, I mean, his what he brings to the table was evident. It was on display outside that first game against New York. His skill set was on display. Did he score 2-3 goals a game? No, but he was doing enough to at least stick around. So I don't like when the Bruins just, I don't know. There's a process you want to see. You want to see players get rewarded for what they've done. And again, there's a big difference between making the team and sticking around through camp. And I just thought he earned that. And it makes me wonder, guys, like you think back to the draft and I believe it's Chris Peters we had on.
Yeah.
He mentioned like that Lysell may have dropped down in the draft because of some character issues. Nobody knows what those are and how how serious it is. But you hear Ryan Mougenel's comments on Lysell last year. You don't get the vibe hearing people talk. All you hear the Bruins say about him is he has skill. You never really hear them talk much about his personality, about his work ethic, or anything like that. And I just wonder, his on ice performance in the last week and a half of camp was certainly good enough to stay through camp. It's pretty unanimous amongst all people who cover the team and watch the team besides the actual Bruins. So it just makes me wonder, like I said earlier in the podcast, I'm curious if you guys feel the same way. Is it an off ice thing that we all just don't have the privilege of seeing? Not privileged, but
and like
you know what I mean.
And like it might not. I mean, maybe, and it might not even be something as bad as like he's like missing meetings or he's talking back to coaches. Like it doesn't even have to be that. It might be. It might just be like, for lack of like a better way to put it, like does he quote unquote get it? Like like is he fully bought in the way you need to
Mature.
be?
Yeah.
Like
maturity level and everything.
yeah. Which like I don't know. Like I don't have enough insight there. Well, obviously, you hear some stuff like that, but like I would have said if his camp had continued the way it started, I think that would have been absolutely fair, because like we even kind of said it when he was struggling. We were on here, we were like, how, with this opportunity in front of you, like how do you not start camp with your hair on fire?
Mm.
And like I don't know, like maybe he, for whatever reason, just got off to a slow start. Like maybe it just took a few days, but
Maybe it stuck with them. Maybe they were like,
yeah,
that first impression was more valuable to the team than the ensuing week.
maybe.
And well, the one comment that Sweeney made to my question about what Lysell might need to work on when he goes down kind of felt like maybe there was a hint there in what they feel, how they feel about him, and maybe personality wise or his decision making, because he said he needs to work on his team game, which to me, I kind of almost felt like he was saying how to be a better teammate, or like how to mesh better or something, like to the effect of maybe him having some selfish tendencies and holding on to pucks, and that's just the style of his game as far as we know. So when he said work on the team game, you can take that a few different ways, but maybe it means like, hey, this is, you have to learn that when you're on the ice, these other guys, you have to learn how to work with these other guys and not be selfish. And it could just mean, needs to play a better 200-foot game, better defensive game. Like it could mean all sorts of different things, but there is a way to read into it that it might have something to do with, some selfish decision making or something like that.
Yeah, and the other part of it too is, that they're not expecting somebody to. They kept making reference to how the season starts a week from tomorrow, a week from tomorrow, and we want to get people ready for game one. Game one, it's just such a short-sighted viewpoint. Like, we got to get the team ready for game one. Yeah, I get that, but like, does he have to be a finished product by game one if you were to carry him, or even just see him through camp? Like, it's just short-sighted. It's I don't know. I just think they're not respecting the process that they owe to themselves for drafting the player, and the player for showing up at least after the first week of camp. Sometimes 1 + 1 = 2, and I don't know why they're trying to overcomplicate the situation. Player played well. He fits a need if he's on his game. Let him see if he can get to his game, and just see what happens. But they don't want to do it because Tyler Johnson's here and Morgan Geekie. We got to give him reps up, and I like Geekie. I'm just saying, like, just stop being so conservative sometimes. You clearly have a need. And I don't know if you guys saw that first episode of Behind the B, but the Bruins were talking about we've been saying all along, they're just trying to patch and play until they get to the deadline, and they want to pay for a top 6 forward. That's what they want to do. So I don't think, but even still, it's like, okay, can Lysell not be one of those possible solutions in the meantime? I don't know.
Yeah. And by the way, for people who might not understand like this side of it, it's not a contract issue. It's not a big contract. He's a rookie. It's not that they can't sign him and send him back. He's young enough. Like contract is not interfering with these decisions, is what I'm trying to say for people who didn't know that.
Yeah. And what Brian's referring to with the Behind the B, like that's exactly what I thought. Like as soon as we saw what they did in free agency is, yeah, they're going to try to plug that top 6 hole, with what they have internally. And I'm sure we'll see some different options. And, just because Fabian Lysell doesn't start here opening night, like that doesn't mean he's not going to be one of the guys. Like he might get a look at some point. But yeah, pretty clearly, like the intention is let's, stay out of long-term IR, leave ourselves some cap space, accrue cap space during the season, and then go trade for a top 6 forward if we need it. As Brian said, like you saw Sweeney say exactly that on Behind the B in the episode where they're all in the room up at Warrior talking on day one of free agency.
Which also correlates to the Jeremy Swayman stuff from earlier, where they're trying to reserve some cap space and not have to pay 100% of what's remaining to the goalie. So there's definitely no shortage of storylines as the calendar flips to October tomorrow. Bridget and Scott, are there any final takeaways before we depart?
Well, I had just some other guys spoke today. We talked. We had a chance to talk to other guys. I don't know if you want to get into some of the other stuff that might have gotten buried by the Swayman and Lysell storylines. I had some things that I would share if we got the time here.
Sure.
So yeah, we had like open locker room today. There was so many guys out there that finally, we oftentimes don't get chances to talk to guys one-on-one, but we were able to today. At least I was able to for a few guys today. And so I talked to Trent Frederick briefly. He talked about the fact that he's going to be a free agent in the end of this upcoming season because it was brought up during the press conference. And he said, I want to be a lifelong Bruin. That's the good answer, the right answer. But he seems very genuine in it to me. And that's the goal for him. I talked to Matt Patra, who I asked about playing on the penalty kill, and he said he's never played on the penalty kill before, even at juniors or at any level.
I was talking to him about that yesterday too, and I was like, when was the last time you scored a shorthanded goal? And he was like, probably never, because I never killed penalties.
Yeah. So I talked to him about that. It was kind of funny. And I was like, well, is it a role like you'd be comfortable in? He's like, whatever they want me to do, I'll do. So he's, he's going to take more time on the penalty kill, I guess. And then the interesting one, or one of the interesting ones, was Korpisalo, because obviously we get some of the Swayman comments, and one of the big things is that he's probably not the starting goalie on opening night. So Korpisalo is the starting goalie. So he gets asked, can you handle that workload? Because what does the workload look like for him if Swayman's not back, or if he doesn't come back till December, or if he doesn't come back at all? Is Korpisalo in a position where he could adequately play a really big number of games? And basically, obviously, goalies they're always going to be like, yeah, I keep myself in shape, always ready. But realistically, I don't think he was supposed to get more than, 40 games this year, guys. Like something to that effect.
40, I would say like 25.
Yeah, like
30 maybe?
he wasn't expected to, what I'm saying is, he wasn't expected to play more than half the games, where he would have to play more than half the games if they're in the situation that they're in now. So it's obviously a big deal, a big change. And he has to be excited that he came from Ottawa, where he was kind of, on the way out to a place that maybe is going to give him this starting role that I don't think he was expecting. But he said that he was not told that he'll be the starter opening night yet. So I think maybe he was finding that out the same time the rest of us were finding that out today.
Yeah, and again, like the way Sweeney and Montgomery said it wasn't so much like a definitive announcement of like Korpisalo's our opening night starter. It was, even if Swayman signs today, he's probably not going to be ready for opening night. Like
Exactly.
it was just like a statement of fact of like, he's not going to get up to speed in 1 week. So by default, Korpisalo is the starter, because obviously he's clearly been the Bruins' best goalie in camp. I know, like we talked about Saturday's game in context of Lysell, but like Korpisalo played the whole game, played really well, stopped 37 out of 40 shots. So a lot heavier workload than the 7 shots he faced in his first preseason game. And the 3 goals he gave up, I really don't think there was anything he could have done about. One of them, his own defenseman's crashing into him. One, they leave Michkov wide open on the doorstep on the power play. And then 3-on-3 in overtime. So yeah, like he's had a good camp. He's looked good. I still can't say I would trust him as my number 1 on a team that considers itself a cup contender, but I think he can probably be fine for, a few games or a couple weeks early in the season. I'd be worried about it, it lingering much longer than that. But yeah, he's been good so far.
I have a few more.
Please.
So I talked to Elias Lindholm for a little bit, and he mentioned that he said that he's feeling like he's pretty close and that he thinks he'll get into at least one preseason game before the season starts, but said he's good to go he's pretty certain he'll be good to go for opening night. So that's good news. Top line looks like it can be the planned Zacha, Lindholm, Pasternak line. And obviously we'll get to see Elias Lindholm play for the first time as a Bruin coming up soon, which is exciting. And then I talked to Johnny Beecher for a little bit and asked him about his offseason. And, basically Coach keeps saying that he's been very impressed with Beecher. He brings it up pretty much every time he gets asked, like, who do you like? Whose performance did you like? Who's having a good preseason? He brings up Johnny Beecher a lot. And Beecher told me that he worked out a lot this summer on his conditioning. He said he's in the best shape he's ever been in. And he came back he went away for a little bit back home. Took some time off because to rest some injuries, which I should have probably asked him to specify, but he said he was dealing with a few injuries at the end of the season, and that he came back to Boston to start working out just after 4th of July. So he's been in Boston for quite a while, working on things and getting into good shape. And he says he feels pretty comfortable and likes playing with Mark Haslick. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one area of the Bruins roster that will not have any holes this year is their fourth line. I think you have a lot of guys that can play that fourth line that could give you 82 games on a fourth line. I'd be comfortable with them on that line. You mentioned Beecher, Kastelik, Brazeau, Max Jones. There's other, Tufty's a guy who could be interesting at some point. There's a plethora of guys in their depth forwards that love that.
Cole Koepke, who's had a good camp.
Yeah, Koepke's another one. Really been impressed with his game. So, yeah, the Bruins' depth, I think, up front is going to be a big strength of theirs. I think, especially if their depth is tested with injury or just somebody maybe not performing to snuff. So, Beecher's certainly chief among them.
Scott, takeaways. Oh, sorry.
Just to quickly run through a few guys I talked to. So I talked to Mason Lohrei about, if you remember last year, Lohrei was very close to making the team out of camp. He was I think he was the final cut. So I asked him, with Lysell and Merkulov getting sent down, how do you avoid feeling down or letting it get to you? And Lohrei, he said his attitude was basically why would I feel down? I'm close, and now I know they tell me what I have to go work on. Now, I go work on it and keep pushing, and force them to bring me back. So, you would hope Lysell and Merkulov have that same kind of attitude. Talk to Morgan Geekie, who I don't know if you guys saw. I don't think we brought it up on the pod, but last week he said that that he reads everything, which I don't think he possibly actually reads everything, but he said he doesn't really buy into ignore the noise. He said he likes to see what people think of him and use it as motivation when people doubt him. And today I was talking to him today, and he said he set winning the second line right wing job as his goal. He wanted to play in the top 6. He said he got to do it a little last year. He feels like there's still more for him to give offensively. So I feel like Geekie just has this really quiet drive where even when he's saying stuff like this of I'm really confident I'm going to take another step forward, it's just in this quiet, subdued tone. And so I feel like people don't really notice, but Geekie kind of has this thing going where it's go ahead, doubt that I can be the second line right wing. I'm gonna prove you wrong. And then lastly, I was in David Pasternak's scrum, and I asked him. So he talked about his offseason a little bit, and I asked him, if everything was good health-wise this summer, because I think we mentioned, did you remember like after the World Championships, obviously Czech Republic won, there was like that weird translated report where it was like he has a hip injury and might need surgery, which obviously wasn't true. He didn't get surgery. And he didn't directly reference his hip, but he did say like, yeah, I was dealing with a minor injury that kept me off the ice for a few weeks after the World Championships, but he's fine now. So that was the first time I'd gotten a chance to ask him about it. So just figured I'd, for anyone who could kind of follow that, like, seems like, yeah, he was dealing with something, but it was always very minor.
Yeah, just to kind of put a bow on some of the topics you guys just brought up. I mean, the Lindholm point, Bridget, I think it's encouraging to hear that news. It is a little bit different this far into camp to not see either of the Bruins' top two centers play a preseason game just yet. A lot of that's by design, just because you're trying to see younger players, but point still stands. Coyles and Lindholm yet to play, and we'll see them pretty soon. And
well, Lindholm is ruled out for tomorrow.
Yeah, but wanted to get into a game, right?
Yes.
Yeah, eventually. But and then yeah, Scott, the geeky, I saw that story, and I'll be honest, the first thing I thought of was, who's talking shit about Morgan Geeky? Like, I don't really know if I've seen much negative stuff, but maybe it's what's not written about him positively that he's referring to. Like, everyone's talking about Lysell for the second line and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's more like there's been all this talk about who's going to be the second line right wing, and no one ever seems to bring up Morgan Geeky.
Yeah.
And like now he's probably the one who's starting the season there.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot there, guys. A lot there. A lot to keep watching as we go here. I feel like there's a few less storylines going into the last week of training camp that we've had because of some of the cuts. But if some of the younger guys get called back up, those are back on the table. But until then, it does seem like they're electing to go with just a variation of what they had last year up front. And at least in the top six, just plug in Lindholm, no DeBrusk, and then the bottom six is changing a little bit, that fourth line. But yeah.
Well, and this is a contract year for Geeky as well. This is he had a 2-year deal when he came in. So.
I like Geeky guys. Like I think he's gonna do just fine if he's in that role. Like whether he was in that role or Trent Frederick, because despite Lysell getting cut during camp prematurely, I've always thought it was a bit of an uphill battle for him to make the team. So I always kind of penciled in Frederick or Geeky or maybe Brazeau as that player getting the first crack at second line right wing. I think if it's Geeky or Frederick, whomever, I think they'll be fine. Like I think both of those players should be hovering between 45 and 50 points this year, based on their upward trajectory and what I think they're capable of. So, the question with the Bruins second line is not so much can Geeky and Frederick play well there. Is that the optimal, personnel when you're talking about a deep playoff run? And I think obviously Sweeney said as much behind the B. They're going to look to improve there. But for right now, yeah, I'm comfortable with Geeky there or Frederick or Brazeau. I think they'll plug and play fine.
Yeah, because, the other part of that is like, right, it's not necessarily like I don't think they can do the job, but the other night we saw the de facto top line Saturday night against Philly was Frederick, Patrick, Geeky. And like, I also look at that and I'm like, that looks like a really good third line. Like, I would love for that to be the third line, but if Lysell's not second line right wing, or I guess maybe Brazeau, like one of them has to play in the top six. So it also, like, it just makes you deeper, right? Like if you have an upgrade over those guys in the top six, then you put that as your third line and you feel really good. But, it probably opens up a chance for someone like Brazeau to maybe be on the third line. So we'll see.
We have a week for it to all play out. A week from tomorrow, the Bruins will be down in Sunrise, Florida, taking on the Florida Panthers, and they're back in preseason action tomorrow night at the Garden in a rematch against the Flyers, right?
Depending on when people are listening, a week from today.
That is true. That is true. If you are listening on Tuesday, October 1st, it's a week from tonight. But yeah, and then preseason picks up again this week. So they have 3 games I believe it's 3 games until opening night. So you have Flyers in Boston. I think they traveled to Quebec to take on the Kings, and then maybe one other game against Washington or something like that. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but in any event,
that sounds right, I think.
It should be more of the NHL roster, as we saw 17 cuts this week. So Bridget and Scott, that's enough from me. If you guys are good, we can probably get on our way here. So thank you all very much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your work week, and we'll talk to you again on Wednesday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.